Okay, everyone, hello. This is my second sermon. I'm Gary Paul Slicker. Today we're going to be reading Proverbs 3, chapter 3, 11 through 12. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father to son, in whom he delighteth. Okay, so this is a very important verse talking about the correction of God and God correcting his people and God's judgment. So there's a few things I want to get into starting this. So first thing is you know so we a lot of we talk about loving the sinner but hating the sin. And that is very important. We should hate the sin, but we should love the sinner. And I think most people focus too much on the hatred of the sin and not the love of the sinner. So when it comes to this verse, I think it's very important to remember and to go into another Bible story of Jesus when he sat with the children and he was teaching to them. One of the children bring up, he says, isn't it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? And Jesus says, yes, it was said that. But who loves revenge more than you do? And who loves justice more than you do? And he says, should we not allow the Father to handle the justice? Shall we not allow the Father to handle the revenge? And I think that's very important because we need to understand the justice and the judgment of the Lord. Now, it uses the word for judgment and justice as correction, as a father would correct his son, and that is very important because that's what it is. God does not hate us, and through his judgment it's not an action of hate, it's more of an action of love. So through God's judgment, we are being corrected by him as a father corrects his son. So like example, when you were a kid and you did something you were not supposed to, say you took a Sharpie and you drew all over the walls, your dad would punish you by, say, putting you in the corner or making you clean up the mess with a sponge and water. Because your dad didn't do that because he hated you. No, your dad did that to you because he wanted you to learn a lesson, because he loved you. And he wanted you on the right track, and he didn't want to see you, grow up to go to prison or something. Because it starts with drawing on walls, and who's to say it doesn't end with selling drugs on the street, So your dad did that for he could correct your mistakes and teach you to be better. And that's the very important part of this lesson, is that God teaches us that he is the one to correct us, and he is the one to give us justice, and that we should give our revenge and our hatred and give it to him, because he is the one who can give out justice. And it reminds me of a parable that's in Jeremiah. Believe it's Jeremiah chapter 25. And the parable goes that there's a prophet who walks up to a temple. And when he walks up to the temple, he sees 2 baskets of figs. He sees one basket of figs is full of fresh figs, and the other basket is full of rotten figs. So he looks at God and he says, what will you have me do with these figs? And God says, you will take the good figs and you will travel to the marketplaces and into the mountains, and you will give them accordingly to those who deserve it. And you will give, he said, don't worry about the rotten figs, because I will take care of the rotten figs. I will take the rotten figs and I will give it to the rotten. I will give it to those who deserve it. I will give it accordingly to those who deserve it. So it's very important that we need to remember that it's not our job to give judgment or justice to those we think deserve it. There's a saying that's outside the Bible, but in philosophy, of Confucius, who says, if a man takes revenge, he should bury 2 graves. And I think that applies to what this Bible verse is talking about. So God, he says that he's going to correct us, and I think we should trust that. Now, I don't think as Christians we should judge people. I really don't, because it says pretty clear in the Gospels. Jesus says, "Judge not unless you want to be judged." And he also says, how can you talk about the plank in your eye, or how can you talk about the sliver in your neighbor's eye and ignore the plank in your own eye? First, take out the plank out of your eye, and then talk about the sliver in your neighbor's eye. And he also says this many times. He goes up, there's a bunch of Pharisees who are going to stone a prostitute. And he goes up to them and says, "What has this woman done?" And they said she was a whore, so they were going to stone her for it. And he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." So he makes it pretty clear that if you lived a sinless life, you are the only one who is able to judge. You are the only one who's able to give justice, and you are the only one who's able to give revenge. And he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And they drop the stones. And he tells the woman, "Go on and sin no more." And this is something I find, and I've been finding myself lately, and that led me to want to talk about this. See, I'm, like, if you can tell by my shirt, I like a certain kind of music, or I'm into superhero movies, and I hear a lot from these Christians, well, you shouldn't watch that, you shouldn't enjoy that, you shouldn't like it, it's full of witchcraft, it's full of the liberal agenda, it's full of feminist agenda. I don't care. Because here's the thing. I bet you 100%, if I were to go into any of your households, you would have Roseanne playing on the TV show. A show that encourages sex before marriage and other things, and makes it, comedy. I'm pretty sure if I were to go into your house, you'd be watching Family Guy, which is another show that encourages blasphemy. I'm pretty sure if I went into your house, you could be watching Game of Thrones. Or you could be watching Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory, there's a character who's an atheist called Sheldon Cooper, who's very blasphemous. You would probably be watching Young Sheldon, the spin-off, and with Sheldon doing the same thing in that show. So you can't tell somebody what to watch, and you can't tell somebody to listen to. First, if you want to tell somebody what they should take out of their house, take it out of your house first. Take it completely out of your house first. And that's what God's telling us to do. He who is without sin casts the first stone. He who is without sin, who can take all the sin out of their house and not commit it ever again, he should be the first to talk about what somebody else does in their house. Now it says, we should know them by their fruits, of course, and we should love the sinner but hate the sin. And of course we need to discuss sin. We can't just accept sin. We have to bring people to repentance. But we can't judge, and we can't name call, and we can't condemn. And now this is something I struggle with. I struggle with a major sin, which is pride. And I find myself at times being hypocritical. I find myself at times judging others. And I find myself at times believing myself higher than others. And I just find myself name calling. These are things I struggle with as well, and this is mostly a message for me than it is you, and it's a message for both of us. I hope that you endure this message, and I hope it helps me in my own personal walk with Christ. But this is something I deal with personally, and it is said, judge not lest you want to be judged. So I advise us as Christians, and maybe you can practice this over the weekend or the week, I advise as Christians that we listen to the sinners, we love the sinners, and we have to hear what they say. Instead of automatically judging, why don't we invite these people out to eat? Go into their homes and sit with them. Listen to them, listen to their story, listen to their testimony, listen to what they have to say, listen to their confessions. And be like a therapist. Just sit there and listen and listen and listen. Just listen to what they have to say, and then give them an alternative. I call this like kind of spiritual Aikido, or Aikido when it comes to conversation, or charismatic Aikido, or something like that. So it's like a type of Aikido. Instead of completely pushing the Lord on them, or forcing them to believe, or forcing them to change their ways, instead listen to what they have to say and completely reverse it and give them an alternative way of thinking. Meet them where they are and give them an alternative way to think, and say, hey, this is what you're doing, this is what you could do differently. Therapists, they practice this a lot, and that's why more people will go to therapy than they will come to church, and we need therapy. We need people to come to church, and I honestly am a believer that therapy and church can go hand in hand. So I think we should do the same that therapists do and offer advice and say, hey, this is what you could do, and this is what the Lord would want you to do. So, invite them slowly to church. Plant seeds. It's very important. Now, like I said, back to that parable, give apples according to those who deserve it. Jesus says, plant seed, or when you go to plant a seed, make sure it doesn't fall on, if you plant a seed, make sure it doesn't fall on rocky foundation, because you can sit and throw the seeds, and some will fall on the road, some will fall on rocks, some will fall on faulty foundation. But if you throw the seeds onto fertile soil, it will grow beautiful bushes or trees and with beautiful fruit. But you can't force a tree to grow. You can only sit with it, water it, and be patient with it. Patience is the most important thing. You can be patient with it. If you can get somebody into church, that's a huge step. But don't force them to go every Sunday. Just sit with them and say, how'd you enjoy it? Would you ever go again? If they say, no, that's not for me, then that's all you could do. You could lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So you can't force people into this. You gotta let God do this. You gotta surrender it to God, because only He can truly show them the way. You can lead them to God, but they can't bathe in His wisdom. You can force a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And I think this is very important. And so, because oftentimes I feel like we're too judgmental and too hateful, but we can't be that way. We need to people come to Him. And Jesus also taught, when He first made His public sermon, He preached on the street, and a lot of people, they rolled their eyes at Him and said, we don't want to listen to Him. And, some of His disciples, including His mother, asked Him, why are these people walking away? Why are they not listening to you? And He says, if they truly wanted to listen, they'd follow. And then a couple stories afterwards, He tells the Pharisees, the sheep hear my voice, and they listen. And there's also the lost son parable. The son runs away from home. He lives with pigs, and he gets dirty and homeless, and then eventually realizes, I miss God. I miss my dad. I want to go home. So he goes home, and he's welcomed by his dad with open arms. And that's God. No matter how far away somebody is, they'll come home, and God will welcome them with open arms. And it doesn't matter who you are. You're not predestined for hell. And any Christian that says you are predestined for hell, they're liars. They're wolves. And, and I'll get to wolves in a minute, but, God will welcome you home. Now, what I want to talk about wolves, now there's an old saying, a saying I used to hear, and I used to say it myself before being born again, and it's, a wolf doesn't listen to the opinion of sheep. So that's true. That's really true. And it was always used in a selfish connotation, like, I'm just going to listen to myself. But here's the thing. We are sheep. We are the lambs of God. And we shouldn't listen to the teachings of wolves. And they're not going to listen to our opinions. So if you do something that is sinful, and a wolf calls you out on it and says, you're doing this wrong, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them, because wolves only do things for their own validation, their own ego, their own personal gain. They are not there to help you. They aren't there to listen to you. They're there to devour you. So, and there's a parable in Jeremiah as well that says, a man who listens to another man is like a tree planted in the desert. It cannot bear fruit, and when the wind comes, it will topple over. But a man rooted in God and God's word and puts God first is like a tree planted by the water. It will bear beautiful fruit, and when the wind comes, it will not topple over. So we got to remember to listen to what God says and not the words of man. And a lot of the wolves aren't on the outside of the fence. Sometimes they're on the inside with the sheep ourselves. Some wolves are in the churches. Some wolves are in your schools. Some wolves are your friends and family. Some wolves are the people you trust most. Some wolves are even online. And you can't trust them, because they will try to lead you, the Lamb of God, astray. And God said this, that many false shepherds would come and claim my name, and they will lead you astray. And we also got to remember the most important teaching too, that some men will go to God when we die and say, Lord, Lord, did we not do such wonderful things in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? And he will say, depart from me, you evildoer, depart from me, for you never knew me. So it's very important that we trust in God and we don't trust in men. But saying that, then you will probably ask, well, then why even teach? Well, it's also important that God said that we should travel the world 2 by 2 and spread the word to the 4 corners of the earth, spread it far and wide, and make many disciples. So it's also true that we must teach, but we must teach what God taught and not what sounds right at the moment. But, so, yeah, very important for us to simply listen to people and not judge them. And it's honestly important, no matter what person's background is, to love them. And I often say this about my church I go to. I don't care who comes into the church. I don't care what they look like. I don't care what music they listen to. I don't care what their political beliefs are. I don't care what their personal beliefs are. If they're coming to truly seek God, then they should have every right and be allowed to. I don't care if a person comes in with a pentagram tattooed on their forehead and 666 on the back of their forehead. They should, if they're really willing to accept Jesus Christ in their heart, then we should appreciate that. Because at the end of the day, the church isn't for us. It's for God. God is the bridegroom of the church. We are the bride. We are the fellowship. It's not for us to decide who comes in and out. It's for God. So we should welcome all these people in. If the devil even himself came in and truly wanted to lay down his life and give it to God, then by all means, as long as it wasn't a trick. So yeah, and the second point I want to get to today is complete surrender to God. So we got out that, we should give the apples accordingly, and we should be the fertilizer in the seeds. Some seeds will fall on hard ground and some seeds won't. Some seeds will actually grow into beautiful trees that we can enjoy the fruit of. But we got into all that. Now we need to talk about surrendering to God. As God said in that parable, I will take the rotten figs and I will give them out accordingly to those who deserve it. I will give the rotten fruit to the rotten. So sometimes we honestly, truly have to surrender to God and let things be in God's will. Now, last sermon, I talked about my own personal parable about the samurai and the enemy. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes you just cannot beat the enemy. Let me put it in another thing. I like superheroes, like I said. So, in another way to putting it, Spider-Man in the Marvel movies wouldn't be able to fight Thanos by himself. He needs the help of the Avengers. So sometimes you gotta know in a battle when to lay down your sword and when to pick it up. Sometimes in battles you can pick up your sword and you gotta get at it, and no matter how much you fall, you gotta get back up and do it again. But sometimes we gotta lay down our sword and we gotta completely surrender to somebody else who can help us. And sometimes surrender and defeat is the best strategy. Now, I'm not saying you should just give up, because I'm not saying that, the war is lost. No, the war is never lost. We cannot allow the enemy to win. He's not going to win. He's already predestined to lose. So we can't allow him to win. But what we can do is sometimes we can just surrender and allow defeat. We just have to allow defeat. And that's the best option to do. We have to just allow some of the bad things to happen. And that's the best option. Because surrender is the best strategy. And sometimes we got to give it to God. And say you have a bill, say you have rent coming up, you lost your job, but you don't know what to do. Something beyond your control. Well, you can say, God, you got to pray. Pray to God, say, hey, God, help me and get me back and get me this. Because God promises that if you surrender to him, you won't go hungry. He will feed you. You won't go thirsty. He will give you something to drink. You won't be naked. He will give you clothes. You won't be broke. He'll give you money. And that's very important things that God will help you with. Now, God won't always help you in the way you expect. Sometimes he gives you what you deserve rather than you expect. Think of it like a genie. When you go to a genie, you don't always get what you wish for. Sometimes you get exactly what you deserved. the lesson to teach you. Like we said in the last sermon, God will humble you in order to teach you a lesson. And it's also important that, we listen to God's lessons, because every lesson makes us stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So sometimes we need the help of the Avengers to fight Thanos. And sometimes, just like in the first Infinity War, we will lose to Thanos. And sometimes we got to accept that. And sometimes the best thing we can do for our enemies is pray for them. Sometimes you can't fight your enemies head on. Sometimes you have to sit and pray with them. The best way I surrendered, I'll tell you my own personal story, is something happened to me that really embarrassed me on social media, and I felt so embarrassed, and I felt so embarrassed, and I got lost in my head, and I started beating myself up. It's like, what would people think of me? I'm a loser. How could I let this happen? It's tarnished my image. And then I felt the need to lay on the floor. And I just laid, and I completely gave myself up, and I completely surrendered. And I rolled over on my back, and I closed my eyes, and I imagined looking at my ceiling. And I spread my arms out, and I imagined all the darkness that was in me just cast away into the ceiling. And then as that happened, a great portal opened up in the ceiling, a white portal, and a dove came through with a leaf in its mouth and a scroll in its talons. And it was all in my imagination, of course it was. I'm not saying I had a literal vision, but I imagined that, and it brought me so much peace, because I thought to myself, no matter what I can surrender to God. So I prayed and prayed, and the next day everything started getting better, and God was building the pieces for me. So if you're late on rent and you don't have a job, just pray to God. Pray to God, and it will happen. Next day you'll get a job. Next day your rent will get paid. Next day you'll have food on your plate. And always be grateful for what you have. If you do have food and a roof over your head and water to drink and warmth, be so grateful that you have those things. Always be grateful, because there are people out there in the world that don't. So it's always good to be grateful for what you have. And like I said, sometimes you just got to surrender. You got to surrender to God, and He will solve it for you. And sometimes you got to accept defeat, because sometimes you will be defeated, and it will humble you, but it will make you so much better. Now, going back to the enemies, I'm going to be honest. I always made bread with my enemies, and I always was able to find common ground with them. Some of the best common ground and conversations I had was with my enemies when I was giving them food. I was breaking bread with them. And sometimes not. Sometimes I was just sit and listen to my enemies and just listen to what they have to say. And sometimes it was the greatest thing that could happen. And now I understand that there's some enemies you have that really hurt you really bad, and they really hurt you. And I'm not going to ask you to put yourself in danger or harm's way to forgive certain people. I wouldn't ask you to do that at all. Some people I personally think should be avoided. And I think the best thing you can do for certain people is wish them well and avoid them like the Black Plague, and just wish them well. Say, I hope you have a good life. That's the best you can do. It's the best anyone can do. Love your enemies as you love yourself. Forgive and forget. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And completely love God with all your heart and soul. And the most important commandment, do to others as you wish they would do to you. I think this is something myself and all of us need to practice, and I think that it will allow us to be even more humbled and surrendered to God. And so a closing thing that I want to do is I want to go into another talk about sometimes, like I said, you just got to lay down the sword, and you got to accept defeat from the enemy, because when the devil will humble you, and God will allow it. But never, and I can't stress this enough, never ask the devil for a challenge, because you'll only be humbled. So, I think that's all I got to say today. So, yeah, and I wonder if this helped you, because it helped me getting it out. And I want to thank you guys so much for listening. Okay, God bless and bye.